Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Around 220 BC, China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, had a huge problem. He had defeated all of his rival kingdoms and armies in the region, but now he was in charge of a nation that had millions of unemployed soldiers. And they didn't all have farms and homes and jobs to go back to. The emperor was wise. He knew that there was nothing more dangerous than having a massive amount of young men armed with weapons with nothing to do in your country. That is how revolutions are formed. So what did the first Chinese emperor do? Well, he sent hundreds of thousands of his soldiers to go build the Great Wall of China. This would protect the north from the frequent incursions from the monsters that lived up there at the time. You guys should check out this movie, The Great Wall. It's one of the best and most accurate historical dramas from the period. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers and workers would perish in the next decade during the construction of the Great Wall of China, and many of them would be actually buried in the foundation of the wall and become a part of the fortification. Which is why I'm never impressed when a New Yorker tells me, oh, my granddaddy helped build the Empire State Building and the Pulaski Skyway. I can just say, well, my granddaddy was used as a building material for the Great Wall of China. Anyway, the point of this story is, well, one, never trust an authoritarian kind of leader like this. He'll say all sorts of crazy things like God has given him a mandate to conquer new lands and build this gigantic wall to protect his people, but he actually doesn't care about you, the individual. He just sees all of these soldiers as numbers and as problems, which is probably why he was able to deal with the situation in a pretty abrupt manner. And then you have the second factor, and that is having hundreds of thousands of young men armed with weapons, highly skilled at killing things with nothing to do is a great danger. The second thing that we can learn from this story, and something that Emperor Palpatine should probably key in on here, is the fact that having a large amount of soldiers and no war creates huge logistical problems that can be solved by what? Large infrastructure programs. Which brings me to the subject that I want to talk about today. What exactly is the Empire going to do with the clones now that we know they're going to be decommissioned? Things are not looking good for Palpatine. I mean, Senator Rio Chuchi has been championing clone rights in the Senate. She's even talking about things like clone pension plans. I mean, the entire thing sounds extremely expensive. By the way, I've never thought I would hear clone pension plans, and I'm really happy that this is now something being discussed. Worse yet, Senator Chuchi had uncovered the fact that Vice Admiral Rampart had destroyed the cloning facilities on Kamino and then blamed the whole fiasco on a giant storm, as if the Kaminoans haven't been living on this terrible planet for thousands of years, weathering terrible storms. Bail Organa gets it.
Tipoca City, designed to be submersible, weathered thousands of storms over the years, yet it's suddenly wiped off the map.
But Senator Palpatine saves the day by spinning the events. He points out the fact that the clones are a liability because they're so obedient they'll even follow illegal orders like the one that Vice Admiral Rampart gave to them to fire on Tipoca City, which technically is their home world and home city. By painting the clones as dangerous, unhuman, robotic, and stuff like that, he's dehumanized the clones, so forget about talks about pension plans and retirement plans. It's actually a brilliant move by Palpatine. And so now the clones are going to be decommissioned, out of sight and out of mind. Which again is not a good idea. I mean, even since the first day they were rolled out, the clone trooper army has not been as perfect as the Kaminoan cloners promised they would be. I mean, the clones have never really 100% got along with what the Republic and now what the Empire wanted them to do. There have always been individuals that were troublemakers. First, we had people like Sergeant Slip and Cutler Quain. Then we had Captain Rex, Clone Commando Gregor, Captain Hauser, Commander Cody, and now Slip and Cade. The clones are definitely quite obedient, but they're also sentient human beings that react to what's going on around them. They were trained to be obedient and loyal to the Republic, but now the Republic has gone, and the Empire that has replaced it, well, it isn't living up to those standards. They were supposed to be protecting the people of the galaxy, not exploiting them and taking their resources. And so some clones become whistleblowers, some clones go AWOL, some clones even take up the fight against the Empire. It's just the beginning of these signs that the clones and the Empire are no longer as compatible as their designers wanted them to be. The only thing that really guarantees the clones' allegiance en masse is those inhibitor chips in their brains. Now, if I were Palpatine, what would I do to the clone trooper program? Well, I would actually take a page from the Chinese Emperor's book He was actually a pretty competent individual in a lot of ways before he started, drinking mercury. I would take all of those hard-working clones and convince them that their next patriotic duty is actually to build the Death Star. I mean, it's almost the perfect solution if you think about it. The Empire, for all of its stupidity and mistakes, was really good at doing one thing, and that's building massive and large, unnecessary projects, from giant superstar destroyers to the Death Star battle stations. The Empire's economic strategy, which basically involved them nationalizing everything from planets to resources to entire industries, was designed to make their military-industrial complex as powerful as possible to really cut the costs on some of these larger items. But there's always going to be manpower shortages. The Empire would at first use the Geonosian hives for most of the construction for the shell of the Death Star. Then they would rely on captured slaves like Wookiees. They would also use droids to install the various modules on the Death Star while it's in space. Eventually, they would even use Imperial prison labor to build the components for the Death Star in death camps. And so it's only logical to take all of these clone troopers who have nothing to do anyway and use them as free labor to build the Death Star. Otherwise, you're just firing a few million highly trained soldiers who have no other skills or prospects than snapping necks and blowing things up, making them prime candidates for every criminal cartel and pirate organization or rebel group out there. Not a good idea. I actually see no alternative here for Palpatine. I mean, especially because the rebellion is quietly growing in the Outer Rim. The last thing you want to do is send 100,000 or millions of candidates their way. But it has to be said, the clones are not monolithic, and anyone who treats them as such, whether it's Palpatine, Senator Rio Chuchi, will be in for a huge surprise. I mean, Palpatine should have never trusted or believed what the Kaminoans were selling him, and he probably didn't trust them 100%, if we're being fair. The Kaminoans claim to have made the clones loyal and obedient servants, who also have the creativity and individualism to make them great soldiers as well. The reality is these two personality traits kind of clash against each other, especially if you're talking about genetic predisposition of people. A person who is blindly loyal will probably lack the intelligence to be a great soldier, whereas someone who is smart enough to outthink his enemies will never be completely blindly loyal. And so the only way you can do things is find someone who is innately smart and intelligent, and then convince them that loyalty to your faction is necessary because your faction is awesome. You actually have to put the work in and create natural loyalty. And the clones, well, they were based off of one of the most ruthless and talented bounty hunters in the galaxy. And so, yeah, you're not gonna get blind loyalty very easily from individuals like this. Even with all of the genetic modification the Kaminoans made, I don't think it's enough. But the thing is, the Republic, despite all of its flaws, was a much easier sell to the clones. It was a representative democracy, there was rule of law, checks and balances, plus you had the heroic Jedi running around and leading the military, which created a very visible and positive symbol for the clones to follow. The Empire was just depressing. It was a lot grayer, there was less color, it wasn't as fun. I mean, I think these changes started affecting a lot of these clones who are already on the border of kind of thinking about their purpose in life. But you still have this huge body of clones who have no other purpose but then to serve the military. And so they'll cling on to that job even if they don't agree 100% with what the Empire is doing, because again, you have your genetic parts and then you have your conditioning and training, and these clones are trained to be good soldiers, and good soldiers, well, they follow orders. And for some of them, the thought of retirement or being too old or injured to fight probably terrified them more than death.
And what happens when you're too old to fight?
That's not a scenario we're trained to think about.
It's time you did. All of you.
Which is why decommissioning these clones without any kind of plan, well, it'll create a lot of resentment and potentially even a mutiny from the clones. Well, can you mutiny if you're getting kicked out of an organization? I mean, I guess, I don't know. The point is the clones have their leaders and rebels amongst their ranks, from Hauser to Cutler Quain. There will be clones who will not take unfair treatment kindly. At the same time, we also have to realize that there are going to be clones like Dogma, the individual who took Ponkrell's side when he was leading the 501st headfirst into one casualty-ridden battle after another. And so there are going to be all different types of opinions, different type of clones with different motives and goals in life. And with a split leadership, or maybe a lack of leadership, there's the potential that there might even be a clone civil war. In Legends, there was actually a clone civil war that happened on Kamino. The Kaminoan cloners saw the writing on the wall and decided to go down with a fight and created a new batch of clones to fight the Empire. It didn't really go well for them, of course. There's also the fact that we saw in the Bad Batch that the Empire has even figured out how to increase the potency of the inhibitor chips for the clones. I believe assassins like Clone X will be used by the Empire to carry out false flag attacks against the Imperial citizens to turn public sentiment against the clones. I mean, this is key here for Emperor Palpatine. He really does not have the funds to pay for a clone pension plan or retirement. There's also going to be clones who are going to stay loyal to Emperor Palpatine up until the point they're on the conveyor belt heading into the furnace. That will recycle them into protein square blocks for future stormtrooper units. Yum. I mean, take Crosshair for instance. The man more or less was left behind to die by Vice Admiral Rampart during the destruction of Kamino, and he still crawls back to the Empire begging for work and purpose. The reality is this Grand Army of the Republic, or Grand Army of the Empire now, will be at least 1 million strong, if not several millions strong. Remember, we're just a year or so removed from the last year of the Clone Wars. Most clones are still in their prime age and ready to continue service. Even with the casualties and the other figures in place, we're still talking about a massive amount of people. Whether Palpatine likes it or not, he needs to put some real policies in place to prevent a disaster from happening. And while the rebellion and former separatist holdouts are going to be a huge concern for the Empire in these early years, there's no bigger problem for the Empire than this huge group of clones who now no longer have jobs. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think will happen to the clones. How will they be gradually decommissioned? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.